Hi, I'm Jim Bergen, pastor at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Houston, Texas. This is a sermon for August the 2nd, 2026, Matthew 14, 13 to 21. Food or revolution? The early days of Roman civilization on the Italian peninsula were idyllic. Records show peaceful farm life on efficiently used private property. Towns were built to support peasant farmers with markets and meeting places. A typical peasant family in the early republic owned several acres, and the whole family did their part in sowing, tilling, reaping, and marketing. Crops were regularly rotated between grains and legumes to promote soil fertility. Fruits, vines, vegetables, and olive trees cultivated. Sheep, goats, cattle, and poultry common. Communities produced surplus goods to share and sell, but they were subject to invasions from people who would rather steal food and crafted products instead of going through the work of growing and harvesting and manufacturing. So, militias were formed to protect the food sources. Over time, militias grew into armies or was subverted by occupying armies. War changed the agricultural world. First, to be a soldier, you had to be a landowner. That way, you had a dog in the fight, so to speak, protecting your own property and family. Sadly, many farmers died or were disabled in combat. Others were absent, fighting battles in distant lands. So the land that they would be working was damaged by war or neglect. In the absence of men's labor, debt on the property mounted, putting tremendous economic pressure on war widows and children. Productive farmsteads were liquidated at depression prices, and people on them killed or sold as slaves. Aristocrats and senators became agricultural plutocrats who merged small acreage homesteads into huge plantations called latifundia. They converted calorie rich cereal crops to grazing land, orchards, and vineyards. And slaves, free labor, did the work. Absentee landlords inspected their holdings occasionally, but never worked the land. By the end of the 3rd century BC, there was a debt ridden tenant class that was undermined and dying in the countryside. And in Rome, a propertyless, rootless, homeless, anarchic underclass whose sullen discontent would eventually destroy the empire that honest peasant toil had built. In 189 BC, Rome boasted 1.1 million people in its metropolitan area. Circus Maximus and Flaminius were freed all free men and women, paid for by the state and the candidates for senatorial office. This, of course, kept the poor from seeking office. Special interest groups and lobbyists eroded representative government. Roman society shifted from a community of fulfilled, happy, free laborers to a community of economics by plunder and slavery. Slaves did the work. Actually, it was just as profitable to be idle as to toil. Think of the intensity of tent cities then and now. Why work a field all day for nothing when you could work a city dump on a street corner for 200 calories an hour? It's a wasteful, brutal system supporting only 2% of the families that had once lived on the same acreage while free. Several social reformers tried to help. In 133 BC, Tiberius Gracchus enacted legislation that would redistribute land to poorer citizens, tax the rich, feed the poor. Quoting from his greatest speech, recorded in Plutarch's Lives, the beasts of the field and the birds of the air have their holes and their hiding places, but the men who fight and die for Italy enjoy only the light and the air. Our generals urge their soldiers to fight for the graves of their ancestors. The appeal is idle and false. You fight and die to give wealth and luxury to others, You're called masters of the world, but there's not 1 foot of ground that you can call your own, unquote. You might recognize parts of that quote from Matthew 8:20 and Luke 9:58, where Jesus in the late 20s AD said, "The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Clear evidence that Jesus was versed in the classics of his day. Paraphrasing from a speech made by Tiberius Gracchus over 150 years earlier, sets a context of deep hatred toward the Roman government. Whilst we can't imagine the anger and the betrayal of the citizenry, we can connect the dots. The Senate killed Tiberius Gracchus. His brother Caius Gracchus assumed leadership. He tried a more balanced legislative approach. He renewed some benefits for peasants. He developed new colonies and suburbs and marketplace trade centers for the middle class. He passed a bill that soldiers be clothed at the public expense. And he gained the gratitude of the urban masses by passing the Lex Frumentaria, which is the corn dole, which committed the government to distributing corn for anyone who could prove citizenship. Entitlements funded by higher taxes made the economy worse. Vested interests prevailed. Caius was also killed and decapitated. Septimius filled his skull cavity with molten lead to collect the reward of the weight of his head in gold, an incentive promised by the Senate. I'm guessing he laughed all the way to the bank with 17 pounds of gold. And farmers continued to be liquidated to supply the voracious Roman monster. Food? Revolution? Pliny said, "Latifundia perdere Italiam," which translates plantations of ruined Italy. Seneca described cattle ranches wider than kingdoms, tended by chained slaves. Pliny mentions an estate with 4,117 slaves, 7,200 oxen, 250,000 other livestock. Corporate farming took over. Human lives did not matter. During the time of Jesus, Rome produced and drank 25 million gallons of wine annually. That's a half gallon a week for every man, woman, and child, slave or free. The empire was so widespread that Rome had to train locals in other communities to be their soldiers. A Jewish farmer in occupied territory had choices. 1, die by the sword. 2, be bought out for pennies on the dollar and moved to the city. 3, become a slave or starve. 4, become a drafted soldier of the empire. That's the best deal. Uniform, food, training to quell the mutinous revolutions brewing in many places in the backwoods. It's a prescription for disaster. Take one small overrun country at the antipodes of a rotten empire, drop it in a seething cauldron of political corruption, which is a sewer of failed social welfare systems and a swelling slum urbanization of former productive farm families. Marginalize a 4,000-year-old religious tradition. Kill without mercy by crucifixion anyone who talks out of line. That's extreme cancellation. And watch your back, because you have created the perfect conditions for insurgency of the most lethal variety. This is the world of Jesus and a social context for the Jesus movement. Food or revolution? The choice is starve or fight. Calories or war? Food or revolution? Outside the resurrection, the most significant miraculous event reported in the Bible is the feeding of large crowds by Jesus. The feeding of multitudes with loaves and fishes is the only story found in all 4 Gospels. Something repeated in the scriptures is doubled in importance. The more repetition, the more exponential the emphasis. The Gentile conversion of Cornelius and his baptism by Peter is told 3 times. Very important, very. This emphasis is surpassed by the repetition of the conversion of Saul to Paul on the road to Damascus, a four-time told tale. We can agree, Peter and Paul are two of the heavyweight heroes of the new Jesus movement, and they only stand in the penumbra, the shadow of the miracle of the loaves and fishes, the feeding of thousands. Nothing else other than crucifixion and resurrection beats that. It is told in Mark 6, Mark 8, Matthew 14, Matthew 15, Luke 9, and John 6. The first big feed comes on the heels of the assassination of the only other probable contender, the revolutionary leader of the Jews against Rome, John the Baptizer. He is a martyr, a human sacrifice to spearhead the revolution, a rallying cry, a signal that it is time. Remember the baptizer. Remember John, the announcer of the Messiah. Beheaded. Silver platter. Does the name Caius Gracchus ring a bell? The crowd that follows Jesus into the wilderness, the unclean place where you do not eat meals, is not out there looking for words of wisdom and consolation. They are not out there for a nice, friendly church picnic. They have been counted. The census has been made. Anytime there's counting in the Bible, the killing's about to commence. You count able-bodied troops in preparation of war. The fighting men are counted at numbers previously, variously 4,000 or 5,000 people. Women and children not counted, but fed. We can safely assume the actual number fed was in the range of 10 to 12,000. Imagine that. 5,000 armed terrorist insurgents in one place, many trained by the legions of Rome. 2,000 years after the fact, researchers listed at least 29 political parties and sectarian affirmations. It's a long list. And it includes people we know about, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, but then there's the Therapeutae, the Rechabites, Nazarites, Zealots, Hemerobaptists, Galileans, Amhaarets, Sicarii, the list goes on and on. Some were enraged farmers with pitchforks. Others were vicious mercenaries who killed for the fun of it and the plundered paycheck perks. None were united. All were volatile sectarians. All were hungry from a day's march, simmering in the late spring heat. Jesus tells them, sit down in the grass. They're about to blow up. Food or revolution? You imagine 13 people controlling an urban riot in 2026. Jesus says to the crowd, anaklithanai, two meanings in Greek. One, recline in a festal mode for a drinking party. Two, at ease, remain alert. The crowd does not anaklithanai, does not obey. Instead, the crowd does anapaison prasiai, prasiai. That was a farmer's term originally, meaning in a garden bed divided. You got your row of corn, you got your row of potatoes, you got your row of cucumbers, hot peppers, there you go. That's anapaison prasiai, prasiai. It later became a military term, meaning line up in ranks and divisions. Officers, strategists, special forces in the front for a high-level briefing with the commander-in-chief, privates, grunts, Sherpas, laborers with support families in the back. All were there for revolution, not food. They will carry the food they can and plunder the rest on the way to the battlefield, stripping the land as they go. Reviewing the precedents and priorities, Moses was part of a continual feeding of the children of Israel through the miracle of manna in the wilderness. Don't forget the corn dole of the emperors of Rome, feeding citizens by taxing them to death so that the elite could gorge on delicacies. Jesus is the instrument of God who feeds all people free with shared resources. 5 buns and 2 sardines. While food is a major theme, this is about revolution. It's a troop muster. All are packed to march on Roman settlements. They knew that Arminius in Germany successfully wiped out 3 Roman legions not that long before at the turn of the century in northern Germany. Maybe, just maybe. And then Jesus orders them to sit down in the grass and relax and eat all the provisions for the journey and the battle. The mention of grass means early springtime. The harvest is not in yet. If they keep marching, the grain will die in the fields with the farmers off to war. The citizens remaining at home will die of starvation. It's lose lose either way you look at it. There'll be no calories to fuel a march, let alone a battle. Food or revolution? Crowd's not united enough. Romans 2 entrenched in this place to win a battle. Terrible atrocities will befall the Jewish religion and people. If the sectarian and violence continue, as Jesus so aptly described Pilate at his trial, my kingdom is not of this world. The kingdom of God's portrayed many times in the Bible as a great banquet. Multitudes, myriads, and millions have personally broken bread with Jesus. And in the process, we've been filled to overflowing in surprising new ways. Revolution, temporary worldly solution, resolves nothing in the long run, does not build up, but only breaks down. Food, breaking bread together, gives both physical and spiritual benefits. So Jesus continues to divert us daily from our destructive ambitions, inviting us to joyfully join in his miracle of peace, possibility, and participation in a new kingdom. Food or revolution? That's food for thought. Amen.